Some stories begin with hope. Others start with a warning sign. On a misty spring morning in Cedar Falls, a grieving little girl named Maddie walked into the county shelter, where a battered German shepherd, Brutus, waited behind a kennel marked "Last Chance." One touch between them, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. In a town ruled by rumors and fear, Maddie saw something no one else would: a broken heart in need of saving. But would her courage, and Brutus's, be enough to change their world? If you believe every soul deserves a second chance, give this video a like. And if you want to join us for more true stories of hope and healing, hit subscribe and become part of our community. Stay with us, because what happens next will test not just a dog's loyalty, but an entire town's capacity for forgiveness. You might think Cedar Falls, with its weathered clapboard houses and neatly trimmed lawns, was the safest place in the world to grow up. But that morning, the air in town felt tight, like a secret was pressing against every window. The Parker family's battered pickup rolled into the parking lot of the Cedar County Animal Shelter, just as the spring sun crept over the low hills, lighting up the mist rising off the river. Inside, the shelter buzzed with noise: the barking of lonely dogs, the hum of fluorescent lights, the sharp voices of staff tired from another night of cleaning and feeding and hoping for adoptions that rarely came. Rick Parker, shoulders hunched, kept his eyes low as he signed in at the desk. He hadn't wanted to come. Not today, not with Maddie. But it was Saturday, and after weeks of silent dinners and her barely speaking, he'd given in. Maddie Parker, 8 years old, tangled hair pulled into a lopsided braid, stood clutching her backpack in both hands. Her sneakers scuffed the faded linoleum as she trailed after her father. She looked smaller than usual, as if grief had stolen inches off her frame since her mom died last fall. The shelter director, Donna, greeted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You two looking for a new friend today?" Donna asked gently. Rick hesitated, eyes flicking over the barking cages. "We're just looking," he muttered. But Maddie's attention had already locked onto the back row. A shadow moving behind chain link, a flash of gold and black fur. She edged closer. That's when she saw the sign on the kennel: Brutus, Last Chance. Underneath, red letters: scheduled for euthanasia. Aggressive incidents reported. Brutus was huge, a German shepherd with scars on his muzzle and an old chain collar tight around his neck. His eyes were sharp amber, wary but not wild. As Maddie knelt, ignoring the warnings, the big dog inched forward. She slipped her fingers through the fence. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Hey, careful!" a volunteer barked, hurrying over, but stopped short as Brutus pressed his nose into Maddie's palm, breathing slow. She didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, "It's okay. I know you're scared too." Behind her, Rick stiffened. "Maddie, come away from there now." She shook her head, lips trembling. "He's not mean. He's just sad." Donna sighed. "Sweetheart, that dog. He's been through a lot. He doesn't trust people and—" "He trusts me," Maddie interrupted. The certainty in her voice caught everyone off guard. One of the shelter volunteers, a college kid with a nervous smile, stepped up. "Honestly, Brutus isn't as bad as folks think. He got scared during his last home. There was a break-in, and he protected the kid. But he bit someone," Rick snapped, voice cracking with a mix of anger and fear. "You want that in our house?" "He only bites if he thinks someone's in danger," the volunteer tried to explain. But Rick was already shaking his head, chest tight. The loss of his wife was still raw, and the thought of bringing home a dog with a history, of risking Maddie getting hurt, was too much. "No, we're not doing this. Not today, not ever." Maddie's chin quivered. Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Dad. please. He's like me. He just needs a chance." The words tumbled out, desperate. "You said sometimes we have to try, even when we're scared. You said that after Mom." Rick winced. His hand balled into a fist. He glanced at Donna as if begging for backup. Donna looked between them, torn. A fresh argument erupted from another room. Someone had overheard Maddie's plea and was already whispering to another staff member. "That's the dog from the Johnson case. The aggressive one. The Parker girl wants him. Isn't her family messed up enough?" Maddie heard the words, flinched, but didn't let go of the fence. Brutus stared at her, unblinking, and for a heartbeat, the world went silent. Just a girl, a broken dog, and a father running out of excuses. Donna's radio crackled. She hesitated, then sighed. "Look, we have a 2-week trial adoption program, but one complaint, one problem, and Brutus comes straight back. That's non-negotiable." She knelt to Maddie's height. "It's not a game. He'll need training. He'll need your dad's help too." Rick stared at the dog, at the way Brutus lowered his head in submission when Maddie stroked his ears, at how the big animal barely moved unless she did. Every instinct told him to walk away, but when he looked at Maddie, he saw not just his daughter, but his wife, her stubborn kindness, her way of finding the bruised and broken and loving them anyway. He scrubbed his face with both hands. "Fine, 2 weeks, that's it. If anything goes wrong, he's coming back." Maddie threw her arms around him. "Thank you. Thank you, Daddy," Brutus whined, tail thumping once against the concrete. For a split second, something like hope flickered in his eyes. As Rick filled out the paperwork, staff members murmured in the background. Some shook their heads. Others watched Maddie and Brutus with a strange sense of anticipation. Like the story unfolding wasn't just about a dog or a girl, but about the town itself. Donna pressed a slip of paper into Rick's hand. "My number's on here. Day or night, you call if you need help." As they left the shelter, Maddie beamed, clutching the leash with both hands. Rick glanced at Brutus, who walked beside his daughter with surprising gentleness, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the first real step toward healing. Cedar Falls wasn't ready for what would happen next. But sometimes, the most dangerous stories are the ones that begin with a simple act of mercy. News travels fast in a small town, faster than cars on Main Street, faster than spring storms rolling over the fields. By Sunday morning, almost everyone in Cedar Falls had heard the same sentence, in one version or another. The Parker girl took home that killer dog. The rumors passed from neighbor to neighbor, picking up speed and venom with every retelling. From their living room window, Rick watched as Mr. Halverson, who'd lived across the street for 30 years, paused while raking his yard, glancing sharply at their house. His wife stood on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, voice low. Rick didn't have to guess who she was talking to. All morning the phone had rung with concerned friends, offering advice or subtle warnings. "Rick, are you sure this is safe? With Maddie there? Heard that dog's bitten before. One of the Johnson kids, wasn't it?" Inside, Maddie ignored the growing tension. She sat on the kitchen floor, arms wrapped around Brutus's massive neck. He leaned into her, tail sweeping the linoleum, his dark eyes calm whenever she touched him. Maddie whispered secrets and dreams into his fur, telling him things she couldn't say to anyone else, about missing her mom, about the empty feeling that sometimes settled in her chest, about how she wished her dad would smile again. But the world outside was less gentle. On Monday, as Maddie walked to school with her backpack bouncing against her side, 2 boys from her class rode by on bikes. "Hey, Maddie!" one called out, a sneer on his face. "Better watch out, or your monster dog might eat someone." The other boy laughed, swerving his bike to block her path. Maddie kept walking, head high, but her cheeks burned. At school, whispers followed her through the halls. Some kids looked at her with wide, frightened eyes, others with mean little smiles, waiting to see if she'd break. At recess, a girl named Zoe, once her best friend, stood with a group by the fence, talking just loud enough for Maddie to hear. "My mom says she'll never let me come over again. She says Maddie's house is dangerous now." The words stung, sharper than any slap. Back at home, Rick was fighting his own battle. Every time the phone rang, he tensed, bracing for another complaint. He found himself staring at Brutus, watching the dog's every move, every twitch of an ear, every bark or growl. Was he really safe? Or was Rick risking everything just to keep Maddie from falling deeper into grief? Late that week, the first real test came. It was Thursday evening, golden light spilling across the quiet street. Maddie sat on the porch steps, Brutus lying at her feet. Across the road, a group of neighborhood kids were riding bikes, racing, shouting, daring each other to go faster. Suddenly, one of the younger boys, Kevin, hit a patch of gravel. His bike wobbled, then flipped, sending him tumbling onto the curb. The crash echoed. Before Maddie could react, Brutus was on his feet, barking, deep, sharp, urgent. He leapt off the porch, running toward the fallen boy. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Kevin screamed, covering his face as Brutus barreled toward him. Windows flew open. Someone shouted, "That dog's loose! Call animal control!" Rick, hearing the commotion, rushed outside in a panic, heart pounding. But what he saw stopped him cold. Brutus skidded to a halt beside Kevin, tail wagging low. He sniffed at the boy, then sat down, head tilted as if checking for injuries. Kevin peeked between his fingers, realizing Brutus wasn't attacking, just watching over him. Slowly, the dog nudged the boy's hand with his nose, whining softly. Maddie ran up, breathless. "He's just trying to help. Don't be scared." But the damage was done. Parents poured out onto lawns, yelling, "Get that animal away! You're lucky he didn't bite." Rick grabbed Brutus's collar, hauling him back to their yard, apologizing again and again. Someone snapped a picture with their phone. That night, Cedar Falls was alight with rumors. On Facebook, a post made the rounds. "Aggressive dog attacks child. Why is he still here?" Some demanded animal control step in. Others, who'd seen what really happened, tried to explain, but the angry voices drowned them out. Inside the Parker house, the mood was tense. Maddie sat at the window, watching the shadows of neighbors move behind curtains, feeling smaller than ever. Rick paced the kitchen, muttering about idiots who don't know the whole story. Brutus lay at Maddie's feet, head resting on her toes, eyes following her every move. Later that evening, Rick sat down across from Maddie. "I don't know if we can keep doing this," he said, voice low. "It's not just about us, kiddo. People are scared, and I don't want you to get hurt." Maddie looked up, determination in her eyes. Brutus saved Kevin. He just wanted to help. Rick sighed. "Yeah, but sometimes people only see what they want to see." That night, as rain pattered against the roof, the three of them huddled together on the living room rug, an unlikely pack facing a world that seemed to want them apart. Outside, the neighborhood braced for another day of rumors and threats. Inside, Maddie whispered a promise into Brutus's fur. "I'm not giving up on you, no matter what." Cedar Falls was a town on edge, but in the Parker house, hope still flickered, stubborn and fierce, waiting for its moment to shine. The weekend came cloaked in a cool fog that clung to Cedar Falls like a secret. After the chaos of the week, the Parker house felt more like a bunker than a home, a place where Maddie, Rick, and Brutus huddled against the world's suspicions. Tension settled over everything. Rick barely spoke, carrying the weight of the town's judgment on his tired shoulders. Maddie tiptoed around him, careful not to stir any more trouble. Even Brutus seemed to sense the strain, moving through the house with careful, quiet steps. On Saturday morning, Rick stood at the window, coffee cooling in his hands, watching the street. The neighbors' eyes followed him everywhere he went, through the kitchen, onto the porch, even out to the mailbox. Maddie stayed mostly indoors, her only real company, Brutus, whose presence was as constant as her own shadow. She'd taken to sitting beside him for hours, just the two of them on the floor, the sounds of the outside world muffled by closed doors. She talked to Brutus more than she talked to her dad these days. Some mornings, she'd wake up before sunrise and find him already waiting by her bed, tail thumping softly. They'd sneak downstairs together, sharing the kind of quiet only the very lonely know. Maddie would curl into the curve of Brutus's body, burying her face in his thick fur. She'd whisper things she couldn't say to anyone else, about her mom, about the empty place she felt inside, about how scared she was that her dad might give up on the dog, or on her. Brutus always listened. Sometimes he'd nudge her gently with his nose as if to say, "I'm still here." Sometimes he'd rest his big head in her lap, breathing slow and steady, grounding her in the moment. She wondered if he remembered his own old hurts, or if he just understood that she needed him more than anyone else did. Rick watched them sometimes from a distance, a strange ache building in his chest. He'd started to think about returning Brutus. Maybe it would be easier, for everyone. Maybe the neighbors would stop calling, and Maddie could go back to being just another kid, instead of the girl with the dangerous dog. But every time he tried to bring it up, he'd see Maddie sitting so still, eyes closed, fingers tangled in Brutus's fur. It reminded him of how she used to curl up next to her mom when she was little, holding on as if love alone could keep the world from changing. Something subtle was happening in the house. The more time Brutus spent with Maddie, the calmer he seemed, less anxious, less on guard, and not just with her. One night, as Rick cooked dinner, he accidentally left the stove on. Brutus padded into the kitchen, nudging Rick's leg until he turned and saw the pot about to boil over. The dog sat, watching Rick with those wise eyes, tail thumping slowly on the tile. It was as if he was saying, "I'm watching out for you too." Another afternoon, Maddie wandered into the backyard while Rick fixed a broken fence post. She got a little too close to the edge where the wood had splintered. Brutus, who'd been lying in the sun, shot up and stood between Maddie and the fence, gently steering her back with his body. Rick noticed, heart pounding. He knelt down, checking Maddie for splinters, but she just grinned and hugged Brutus. "He's my hero," she said, giggling for the first time in weeks. The moments piled up, small, quiet signs that Brutus was more than the town's rumors made him out to be. Rick kept them to himself, unsure if anyone would believe him. He still worried about what might happen if something went wrong, about how close Maddie was growing to the dog, about his own inability to fix everything. But there were times when he'd catch himself watching Brutus and Maddie and feel, just for a second, like maybe things could be okay. Sunday evening brought a kind of peace that Rick hadn't felt in a long time. The three of them sat on the living room floor, a board game spread out between them. Maddie giggled as Brutus nudged the dice with his nose, sending them rolling across the carpet. Rick watched his daughter's face, saw the light returning to her eyes. He found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time since his wife died. As the days passed, Brutus's presence became woven into the fabric of their lives. He waited at the window for Maddie after school, met Rick at the door when he came home from work, curled up at their feet while they watched TV. The nightmares that used to wake Maddie in the middle of the night grew less frequent. When they did come, Brutus would climb onto her bed, pressing his body against hers until she drifted back to sleep. One night, after Maddie had gone to bed, Rick sat in the darkened kitchen, journal open in front of him. He watched Brutus pad quietly down the hall, stopping to check Maddie's door before settling by Rick's feet. For a long time, neither of them moved. Finally, Rick reached down, scratching Brutus behind the ears. "You're good for her," he whispered, his voice thick. "Maybe you're good for both of us." Brutus thumped his tail once, eyes soft. Outside, Cedar Falls was still on edge. The neighbors' whispers had grown quieter, but they hadn't stopped. Rick knew the trial adoption was almost halfway over, and that one wrong move could undo all the progress they'd made. But inside the Parker house, something had shifted, a silent bond forming between a grieving family and a dog everyone else had given up on. For the first time in a long while, Rick let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, second chances were real. Rain spattered the window panes on Monday morning, painting long streaks across the glass and sending ripples down the Parker family's driveway. The gloom seemed to seep into every corner of the house, settling on Rick's shoulders like an old winter coat he couldn't shake off. He stood at the kitchen sink, watching water swirl down the drain, lost in a memory. A softer time when laughter echoed through these rooms and his wife's voice was the music in the air. Sometimes the ache of missing her came out sideways, sharp words, heavy silences, the constant pressure to hold things together for Maddie's sake. But no matter how hard he tried, the guilt always found a way in. He wondered if he'd failed his daughter, if bringing Brutus home was just another desperate attempt to fill the impossible gap left behind. Maddie sat at the dining table, hunched over her homework, the yellow desk lamp glowing around her like a tiny sun. She'd started drawing again, sketches of dogs, wild horses, her mother's old garden. But there was sadness in her lines, a heaviness Rick didn't know how to reach. Sometimes, he caught her tracing the edges of a photograph, her mom kneeling in the backyard, a puppy licking her cheek, both of them laughing. Maddie kept that photo tucked in her backpack, a secret talisman she carried everywhere. The morning felt particularly heavy. Maddie had barely spoken at breakfast, eating in silence while Brutus sat at her feet, head on his paws. When Rick suggested walking to school together, Maddie shook her head and left early, shoulders slumped under her raincoat. Rick watched her go, heart aching. At the shelter, Donna was busy filling out adoption forms, but she noticed Rick the moment he walked in, drenched and tired. He waited until the lobby was empty before sitting across from her desk, hands knotted in his lap. "Donna, can I talk to you for a second?" Rick's voice was low, almost pleading. She nodded, setting her paperwork aside. "What's going on?" He hesitated. I don't know if I'm doing this right. Maddie's been through so much, and I keep thinking I should be able to help her. But it's like I'm always a step behind. She talks to Brutus, but not to me. And with everyone in town, it's just getting harder." Donna leaned forward, her expression gentle. "Sometimes, Rick, love doesn't come in the form we expect. Animals have a way of reaching the places people can't. Brutus is helping Maddie heal in ways you might not see yet." He looked away, shame twisting in his chest. "I keep thinking I should be stronger. She's just a kid." Donna shook her head. "Grief isn't a race. You're both figuring it out, one day at a time. And as for Brutus, well, Sometimes the ones with the roughest pasts have the most to teach us about starting over. Rick sat in silence, the sound of rain ticking on the roof. Donna reached across the desk, squeezing his hand. "You're not failing her. You're here. That's what matters." Back at home, the neighborhood's unease simmered just below the surface. Maddie returned from school to find two women on the sidewalk, peering at their mailbox and whispering fiercely. As soon as she stepped onto the porch, the conversation cut off, but the cold stares lingered. That evening, Rick found a folded piece of paper in the mailbox. It was a petition, signed by a dozen neighbors. "We, the undersigned, demand the removal of the dangerous dog from our community before someone gets hurt." There was no return address, just a string of angry signatures. Rick crushed the paper in his fist, pulse racing. Inside, Maddie tried to ignore the mounting hostility. But even she couldn't block out the constant pressure, the way her classmates avoided her, the way other parents crossed the street when she walked by with Brutus. She stopped asking friends to come over, stopped riding her bike around the block. Cedar Falls had become a maze of closed doors. One night, as thunder rolled through town, Maddie lay awake, the storm echoing her own restless heart. She reached for Brutus, who climbed onto her bed without hesitation. She pressed her cheek to his side, listening to his heartbeat. "Do you miss your old family?" she whispered. "Were you scared when they sent you away?" Brutus huffed quietly, warm and solid. Maddie closed her eyes, wishing she could ask her mom the same questions. Flashbacks came to her in the dark, her mother's hands planting marigolds, her laughter ringing through the garden, the way she'd always known what to say to chase the sadness away. Maddie remembered how her mom loved animals, always taking in strays, patching up broken wings and bruised hearts. It made sense that Maddie clung to Brutus so fiercely. Loving him felt like a way to keep a piece of her mother alive. Rick, unable to sleep, paced the hallway. He stopped by Maddie's door, listening to her soft voice talking to Brutus in the dark. A pang of regret shot through him. He wished he'd been braver, wished he'd found the words to help Maddie heal. Instead, he'd let fear and guilt run the show. Later that week, Rick visited Donna again, voice shaking. "I'm just not sure I'm enough. I don't know how to help her." Donna offered him a tired smile. "Maybe you're not supposed to do it alone. Let Brutus help. Let Maddie help you too." The next day, as rumors swirled and neighbors muttered about the dangerous dog, Maddie found comfort in the small routines she'd built with Brutus. Feeding him, brushing his coat, reading stories aloud while he lay at her feet. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. In the hush of the Parker house, surrounded by ghosts and hope, a grieving family and a second-chance dog began to stitch together something that felt almost like healing, even as the world outside tried to pull them apart. But the shadows of the past were never far behind. The town's anger was gathering, looking for a spark. The real test was still to come. The world outside the Parker home grew sharper, colder. After the petition, the whispers became louder, no longer confined to the shadows. Maddie noticed neighbors stepping farther back on the sidewalk when she passed with Brutus, some pulling their children inside or making pointed calls to each other across trimmed hedges. Even the mail carrier, Mr. Douglas, who used to slip Maddie extra flyers for local ice cream shops, now kept a wary eye on the big German shepherd, never coming closer than the edge of their walkway. Tension in the neighborhood ratcheted up one chilly Tuesday morning. Maddie was brushing Brutus's coat on the porch, the dog's eyes half closed in the sun, when a commotion erupted a few doors down. Two dogs, a scrappy terrier and a big golden retriever, had gotten loose, tearing through flower beds and barking furiously at anyone in sight. Mr. Douglas tried to steer clear, but the terrier lunged, nipping at his ankle. Brutus's ears shot up. He let out a deep bark, not of aggression, but warning, rising to his feet beside Maddie. Maddie's dad had just stepped outside to leave for work when the chaos spilled across their yard. The terrier darted right past Brutus, still barking. Brutus responded with another booming bark and trotted to the edge of the porch, his stance alert but not aggressive. Maddie gripped his collar, her heart racing. But neighbors didn't see the nuance. To them, all they saw was a massive, dangerous dog barking at the mail carrier and loose dogs. Mrs. Halverson snapped a photo from her porch. "There he goes again! That dog's a menace!" she shrieked, already dialing her phone. By midday, the storm hit. Rick got the call at work. Animal Control would be coming to inspect the Parker residence after receiving a formal complaint about dangerous behavior. Maddie found the official letter in the mailbox after school, her hands trembling as she read the cold words. Any further incidents will result in the immediate removal of the animal, no exceptions. Inside, the tension became unbearable. Rick slammed the letter on the kitchen counter, anger fighting with helplessness. "This isn't fair," he muttered, pacing the room. "Brutus didn't do anything wrong. He was protecting you, Maddie. But people only see what they want." Maddie sat silently, hugging Brutus. The dog seemed to sense the anxiety, his ears drooping, body pressed close to Maddie's side. He nudged her gently, whining, and she stroked his head, tears gathering in her eyes. That evening, Animal Control arrived. The officer, Miss Avery, wore a crisp uniform and a wary expression as she stepped onto the porch. Rick tried to explain, detailing the morning's events, pointing out the real culprits. But Miss Avery simply took notes, her face unreadable. "We've had several complaints, Mr. Parker," she said flatly. "This is the last warning. One more incident, no matter the circumstances, and Brutus will have to come with us." Maddie clung to Brutus, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's not bad. He's a good dog. He saved Kevin. He wasn't even barking at Mr. Douglas, just the other dogs." Miss Avery's gaze softened for just a moment, but she held firm. "I'm sorry, but I have to follow procedure." As the officer left, Maddie's world seemed to shrink. She couldn't sleep that night. Listening to the wind rattling the old oak outside her window, Brutus curled tightly at her feet. Even he seemed subdued, his playful spark gone, replaced by anxious glances every time Rick raised his voice or Maddie's footsteps echoed down the hallway. The next few days passed in a haze. Maddie avoided her classmates' stares, and Rick fielded angry calls from neighbors who claimed their children were afraid to walk past the Parker house. Even Donna from the shelter called to check in, her tone serious. "Rick, I know you're doing your best. Just remember, some people don't want to see the good. You have to hold on a little longer." A sense of being trapped settled over the family. Rick wrestled with guilt. Should he have refused the trial adoption? Was he putting Maddie in danger by keeping Brutus? He watched his daughter retreat deeper into silence, the cheerful little girl he remembered slipping farther away. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one bark at the wrong time, and it would all be over. Yet through the fear, tiny moments of hope still glimmered. One evening, as Rick stared listlessly at the TV, Maddie sat beside Brutus on the rug, softly reading aloud from a book about rescue dogs. Brutus listened, eyes closing, tail tapping the floor. Rick watched them, heart heavy but grateful for the peace, even if it felt like it could be shattered at any moment. Outside, the neighborhood remained watchful. neighbors peering from behind curtains or whispering on porches as Maddie walked Brutus on a short leash, always under Rick's watchful eye. She smiled at Brutus, determined to show the world the dog she knew. Gentle, loyal, wounded, but brave. But the threat lingered, impossible to ignore. The words of the official letter echoed in Maddie's mind every time she stepped outside. One more incident. No exceptions. In the face of suspicion, Maddie and Rick clung to the small rituals that kept them afloat. Morning walks in the quiet dawn. Gentle games of tug-of-war in the backyard. Brutus's head in Maddie's lap while she whispered her worries to him. The outside world was hostile, but inside, their bond only grew stronger. No one could see it yet. But Brutus was changing, learning to trust, learning that not all people would hurt or fear him. He watched over Maddie and Rick with silent devotion, always alert, always gentle, determined to protect the fragile peace they'd found together. Yet everyone in Cedar Falls knew, sometimes peace is just the calm before the storm. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, shaking the old glass in the windows. The air in Cedar Falls felt charged, electric, the kind of late spring night where anything could happen. Rick watched dark clouds gathering over the rooftops, his nerves stretched thin after another day of watching the world turn against his family. He tried to focus on the quiet inside their house, the steady drip of coffee into the pot. Maddie humming in the living room, Brutus curled by her side. But something was different tonight. The wind gusted hard, rattling the shutters, and rain started to drum a warning on the roof. Rick moved through the house, unplugging electronics, double-checking flashlights, half distracted by the storm and half by his own worry. About Brutus, about Maddie, about the weight of every neighbor's stare. Suddenly, Brutus's head shot up, ears pricked. He let out a low whine, then barked, sharp and insistent. Rick frowned. "It's just thunder, big guy," he said. But Brutus was already on his feet, nose to the window, hackles bristling with tension. Maddie looked up from her drawing. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Brutus whined again, louder this time. He circled the living room, tail low, eyes darting to the front door. Then he barked, a deep, urgent sound that made Rick's heart pound. That's when Maddie smelled it. Not the wet earth of rain, but something sharp and terrifying. Smoke. "Dad!" she shouted, jumping to her feet. "Something's burning!" Rick's mind snapped into focus. He rushed to the window and squinted through the downpour. Across the street, orange light flickered behind the curtains of the Murphy house. At first, it was just a dull glow, but then the flames leaped higher, hungrily licking at the siding. "Fire!" Rick shouted. He grabbed his phone and punched in 911 with shaking hands. "There's a fire on Willow Street! Murphy's house! People are inside!" Brutus barked frantically, pawing at the door. Maddie pulled on her raincoat, voice trembling. "We have to help them, Dad! Please!" Rick hesitated for only a second, then yanked the front door open. The storm slammed into them, rain plastering their hair to their heads. Brutus shot out first, bounding across the street with Maddie and Rick on his heels. The Murphys' front porch was already engulfed in smoke. Mrs. Murphy stood at an upstairs window, her face white with fear, waving desperately. Her two sons, frozen on the front lawn, sobbed and shouted for their parents, too afraid to go back in. Rick yelled, "Stay back! Help is coming!" But inside, the world turned to chaos. Flames crackling, thunder roaring overhead, smoke curling through every open window. Suddenly, Mr. Murphy stumbled out the front door, coughing, but collapsed in the yard. Rick raced to help him, but Maddie's eyes widened. "Where's their dog?" she cried. From somewhere inside the house, a desperate barking answered. Without a second thought, Brutus lunged up the steps and disappeared into the swirling black smoke. "No!" Rick shouted, panic seizing his chest. "Brutus, Maddie, stay here!" But Maddie could only watch, frozen in fear, as her dog vanished. Neighbors spilled out onto their porches, phones flashing, voices rising in shock and awe. Some shouted warnings. Others simply stared, unable to believe what they were seeing. The dangerous dog, risking everything for someone else's family. Inside, Brutus followed the sound of whimpers. The Murphy's golden retriever was trapped in the kitchen, a fallen chair blocking his way. Brutus pushed through the smoke, nosing the smaller dog until he could wriggle free. He guided the retriever out, barking urgently until both dogs stumbled onto the porch and tumbled down the steps to safety. Maddie screamed in relief, running to wrap her arms around Brutus's neck, tears streaming down her face. The retriever's tail wagged weakly. Mr. Murphy, still coughing, looked up, eyes wide with gratitude. Within minutes, fire trucks screeched onto the street. Flames hissed as water arced through the night. Firefighters rushed into the house, carrying out a dazed Mrs. Murphy. The whole neighborhood watched as the rescue unfolded. Through it all, Brutus stood watch over the Murphy boys and their dog, tail straight, chest heaving but proud. Rick, hands trembling, pulled Maddie and Brutus close. "You're a hero," he choked out, hugging them both. He looked around. Neighbors stood in the rain, silent, unsure what to say. The firefighters checked everyone over, finally declaring, "No casualties, everyone's safe. That dog, he saved the day." Some people clapped, others whispered. A few hung their heads, ashamed of their earlier accusations. Miss Avery from Animal Control arrived, her face softening as she watched Brutus lick Maddie's face and nuzzle the Murphy boys. Rick met her gaze, pleading, "You saw what he did tonight. He saved their family." Miss Avery nodded, wiping rain from her cheeks. "I saw, and I'll make sure the report reflects it." The adrenaline faded, leaving Maddie shaking with exhaustion. She leaned against Brutus, who sat calmly in the mud, letting her stroke his fur as the storm eased overhead. A few neighbors approached, offering quiet thanks. Even Mrs. Halverson, who'd led the petition, whispered, "Maybe I was wrong about him." When the fire was out and the danger had passed, the Parker family made their way home. Brutus limped a little, exhausted but uninjured. Maddie wrapped him in a towel, whispering, "You're my hero, Brutus. You're everyone's hero now." That night, for the first time in months, Rick didn't worry about tomorrow. He watched Maddie sleep with Brutus curled at her feet and realized maybe the world could still change, one act of courage at a time. But as word spread through Cedar Falls, the town would have to decide. Was one night of heroism enough to forgive a lifetime of suspicion? The Parker family didn't know. All they knew was that tonight they were together and safe. Morning in Cedar Falls broke with smoky sunlight and the lingering smell of ash drifting across Willow Street. The fire had scarred the Murphy house, blackened wood, broken windows, caution tape fluttering in the breeze. But what everyone was really talking about was the dog, Brutus, the so-called dangerous animal who'd run headlong into smoke and fire when others hesitated. Overnight, he'd become the town's most controversial figure. By sunrise, word had spread far beyond the burned house. Local news reporters parked vans along the curb, their antennas glinting. Neighbors wandered by, faces caught between awe and skepticism. Some called it a miracle. Others insisted it was a fluke. On Facebook, arguments blazed hotter than the fire itself. "He's a hero," one post read, alongside a photo of Brutus sitting beside Maddie, tongue lolling, fur still singed at the edges. "Don't forget his record," someone else snapped back. "One good deed doesn't erase his past." What about the risks? Rick watched it all unfold from the living room window, torn between pride and anxiety. After the chaos of the fire, the house felt both safer and more fragile, as if peace could crack with a single word from outside. Brutus lay sprawled on the rug, worn out but alert, his head lifting every time Maddie's footsteps crossed the floor. The Murphys themselves were vocal in their gratitude. Mrs. Murphy stopped by the Parker home with her boys and their golden retriever in tow. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling. "If it wasn't for Brutus, we might have lost everything." Maddie beamed, wrapping her arms around Brutus's thick neck. But Rick saw the nervous glances the Murphys cast at the crowd gathering outside, at neighbors whispering in clusters. Later that day, Rick walked to the grocery store and felt the gaze of the whole town on his back. Some folks nodded, offering quiet praise. "That's some dog you've got, Parker." Others looked away or muttered, "Don't get too comfortable. One good night doesn't change everything." By evening, Cedar Falls was at a crossroads. The town council scheduled an emergency meeting at the old community hall. Folding chairs filled with anxious neighbors, everyone eager to have their say. On one side, Donna from the shelter spoke up, voice ringing clear and true. "We have proof now," she said. "Brutus risked his life to save a family and their dog. He deserves a real second chance. And maybe other dogs like him do too." A woman in the back stood up, arms crossed. "My kid's still afraid to walk past the Parker house. What if next time Brutus snaps?" Donna didn't blink. Brutus has never harmed a child, and he's been watched closer than any dog in this county. What happened last night could have happened to any of us. Maybe we should ask what we're teaching our kids, fear or forgiveness. The debate spilled over into local social media, the comments section a battlefield of hope and suspicion. Some argued for mercy. Others demanded Brutus be removed from town altogether. Even the local newspaper ran a headline, "Hero or Hazard? Town Debates. Fate of Fire Rescue Dog." Maddie felt the tension at school. Some classmates were suddenly friendlier, wanting to sit near her at lunch, asking what it felt like to have a super dog. Others just watched in silence, their parents' warnings ringing in their ears. At home, Rick saw how much it cost Maddie, how her smile flickered when she read the mean comments, how her hands trembled when she saw another news van parked nearby. He did his best to shield her, but it was impossible to keep the world at bay. One afternoon, Donna came by with a proposal. "The mayor's offering a deal," she said, settling onto the Parkers' porch. "He wants to hold a formal temperament test for Brutus, public, in front of the whole town. If Brutus passes, he stays. If not—" Her words trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy. Rick's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. He's already proved himself." Donna shrugged. "Life's not fair, but maybe this is Brutus's chance to finally change some minds for good." Maddie listened, eyes wide and determined. "We'll do it," she said. "Brutus can show them." That evening, as the sun set orange over Cedar Falls, Maddie sat on the porch steps, Brutus's head in her lap. She stroked his fur and whispered, "I know you're scared. I am too. But we have to show them who you really are." Rick joined her, his arm draping over her shoulders. "We're in this together, kiddo. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. And of Brutus." Inside, Donna drafted a letter to the town council, officially recommending a second chance program for high-risk dogs, using Brutus's story as a beacon of hope and change. As the days ticked by, the town's nerves stretched thin. People whispered in the grocery aisles, at church, outside the school gates. Some practiced lines of support. Others rehearsed arguments. The old divisions had deepened, but something new was stirring. The idea that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness could be as contagious as fear. The date for the temperament test was set. Flyers went up at the post office and library. The whole town would be watching. The pressure built in the Parker house, Maddie and Rick working with Donna and a trainer, practicing commands and preparing for every possible surprise. One evening, as lightning flickered on the horizon, Rick found Maddie crying quietly in her room, Brutus's head in her lap. "What if we fail, Dad?" she whispered. Rick knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Then we get back up and try again, because that's what second chances are about." Outside, Cedar Falls braced for the test that would decide not just Brutus's future, but what kind of community they truly wanted to be. The morning of the temperament test dawned bright and unnaturally still, as if Cedar Falls itself was holding its breath. The whole town buzzed with anticipation. Flyers about the test fluttered from every lamppost and bulletin board. By noon, cars lined Main Street all the way to the city park, where a makeshift arena had been roped off with yellow tape. The air was thick with expectation and tension. Every conversation circling back to one subject. Brutus, the last chance dog. In the Parker house, Rick knotted his tie with trembling fingers, checking the clock for the 10th time in as many minutes. Maddie stood in the hallway, fidgeting with Brutus's collar. She had brushed him twice, polished his tags, and packed a bag of his favorite treats. Donna and the professional trainer, Miss Elkins, arrived early, their faces serious but encouraging. "All right," Miss Elkins said, kneeling in front of Brutus. "Remember your training, buddy. Sit, stay. Focus on Maddie and Rick. We'll be right beside you." Maddie nodded bravely, but her palms were sweaty. Brutus seemed to sense the weight of the moment, looking from Maddie to Rick and back, then giving a slow, steady tail wag that made Maddie laugh despite her nerves. By early afternoon, the park was crowded. Spectators filled the benches and grass. Families gathered with picnic baskets. Reporters clustered by the roped-off arena. The mayor stood on a small stage, clipboard in hand. The judges, a mix of local officials, animal behaviorists, and Donna, sat at a long table, their faces stern. Rick spotted both familiar and unfriendly faces. The Murphys waved from the front, their golden retriever sitting proudly at their feet. Mrs. Halverson hovered by the refreshment stand, arms folded, lips pursed. Some classmates from Maddie's school clustered under a tree, watching with wide, curious eyes. The mayor cleared his throat, amplifying his voice over the speakers. "Thank you all for coming. Today we'll determine whether Brutus, under the care of the Parker family, is a safe and rehabilitated member of our community. Please remember, this is about safety, but also about hope and fairness." The first test was basic obedience. Brutus had to sit, stay, come when called. Maddie's voice shook at first, but Brutus responded perfectly, eyes locked on her, tail brushing the grass in concentration. The crowd murmured with surprise. Miss Elkins guided Maddie through each command, her presence a silent anchor. Next came the distractions. Volunteers tossed balls, banged pans, rode bikes in circles, even staged a mock shouting match nearby. Brutus flinched at the noise but didn't bolt or bark, instead glancing anxiously at Maddie, then at Rick. Maddie knelt beside him, whispering steady words of reassurance. "It's okay, I'm here. You're doing great." One judge walked by with a toddler who waved a toy in Brutus's face. Brutus sat calmly, ears back but patient, eyes softening as the toddler giggled. Donna smiled at the sight, quietly wiping a tear from her cheek. For the final test, the mayor announced, "Now we will observe Brutus's response to unpredictable situations, a real test of temperament and control." As the test began, a gust of wind swept through the park, scattering napkins and flyers. Suddenly, a young boy from the audience broke free from his mother's hand, darting across the field toward the busy road at the park's edge. The crowd gasped as the boy, oblivious to danger, ran straight for the curb. Before anyone else could react, Brutus shot to his feet, breaking away from Maddie's side. A stunned silence fell as he sprinted after the boy. Maddie screamed, "Brutus, no!" But what happened next changed everything. Brutus reached the child in seconds, gently herding him away from the curb with his massive body, blocking his path to the street. He nudged the boy back toward his mother, standing between him and the traffic, until the woman snatched her son up, trembling. The park was silent, stunned, anxious, hearts pounding. Then, as the reality sank in, applause erupted. The mayor, eyes wide with relief, clapped first. Then the crowd joined in, cheering louder than anyone could remember in years. Maddie raced to Brutus, throwing her arms around his neck. "You did it, Brutus! You saved him!" Donna stepped forward, voice strong. "This is who Brutus really is. He's not a monster. He's family. He's a hero again." The judges conferred briefly. Then the mayor took the microphone. "After what we've seen today, I think the town's made up its mind. Brutus passes the temperament test. He can stay, permanently." The crowd exploded with cheers. Some neighbors wiped away tears, others patted Rick on the back or called out congratulations. The Murphys hugged Maddie and Brutus, their golden retriever wagging as if in approval. Even Mrs. Halverson, always the loudest critic, stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching the dog she'd once tried to banish become the symbol of something bigger than fear. As the sun dipped low, painting the park in gold and amber, Maddie and Rick walked home with Brutus trotting between them, head high, tail swishing like a flag. For the first time in months, Maddie felt the weight of worry lift. They had fought, together, for a second chance, and won. That night, Cedar Falls seemed transformed. Windows glowed with warmth, laughter drifted through open doors, and the story of Brutus, the dog nobody wanted, became a legend of hope and redemption. In the days after the temperament test, Cedar Falls felt like a different town. The old tensions had loosened, replaced by a strange, hesitant hope. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid the Parker house now waved or even stopped to say hello. For the first time in months, Maddie felt like she could breathe. She found herself lingering in the yard with Brutus, letting the sun warm her face, not caring if anyone was watching. Inside the house, change unfolded quietly but unmistakably. Rick kept his journal open on the kitchen counter, scribbling thoughts late into the night, his handwriting looping wildly as he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. He watched Maddie moving through her days with newfound confidence, a lighter step, laughter that came more easily, a willingness to speak up in ways she hadn't since her mother's death. One Saturday morning, Maddie sat on the back porch with Brutus sprawled at her feet. She traced her fingers over the rough patches of fur on his neck, the places where old scars were growing over with new hair. She talked to him in the hush of the morning, her voice clear and steady. "You know, Brutus, I used to think being brave meant never being scared. But maybe it just means loving something, or someone, everyone else is afraid of." Brutus closed his eyes and huffed, as if in agreement. Maddie smiled, brushing her hair from her face, feeling a deep calm settle in her chest. Later that day, Rick joined her on the porch, his journal tucked under his arm. He sat beside her, silent for a moment, then opened his notebook and read aloud. "I thought I was fighting for Brutus. I thought I was doing it for Maddie, or maybe for myself. But now I see. I was fighting for the hope that things could get better, that grief doesn't have to be the end of our story, that sometimes when you give something broken a chance, It can show you how to put yourself back together. Maddie listened quietly, her eyes shining. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. Brutus shifted closer, pressing his head into Rick's lap, as if adding his own silent comfort. As the days passed, the story of Brutus rippled through Cedar Falls. At school, Maddie noticed other kids starting to talk to her again, asking about Brutus, about the test, about how it felt to be part of something bigger than herself. Some even apologized for things they'd said or done in the past, awkward but sincere. One afternoon, a teacher pulled Maddie aside. "You've changed, Maddie. You stand up straighter. You speak your mind. I'm proud of you." Maddie thought about her journey, the long, lonely months after her mother died, the anger and sadness she'd carried, the way the world had closed in. She realized that loving Brutus, fighting for him, had helped her find her own voice. It wasn't just about saving a dog, it was about saving herself. Rick noticed changes in himself too. He no longer avoided Donna's calls or the sympathetic glances from neighbors. He found himself volunteering at the animal shelter, helping with training and paperwork, even speaking at community meetings about second chances, for dogs, for kids, for families who'd lost their way. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table, flipping through his journal. "I used to think healing was something you did alone," he wrote. "But now I know. Sometimes you need help. Sometimes healing means letting people and dogs back in, even when it's scary." The whole town seemed to soften. The mayor launched a series of community conversations about prejudice, forgiveness, and what it really means to judge someone, or something, by their worst day. Donna spearheaded a new Second Chance program at the shelter, giving high-risk dogs a shot at rehabilitation and love. At home, the Parkers created new rituals. Family dinners became a nightly event, filled with laughter, stories, and gratitude. Maddie began leaving her bedroom door open at night, no longer afraid of shadows. Brutus slept beside her bed, his gentle breathing a comfort. One Sunday, the Parker family attended the local spring fair. As they walked through the bustling crowds, people stopped to greet them. Children pointed excitedly at Brutus. Parents asked questions about training and patience. Maddie held her head high, proud to be known as the girl who'd stood up for a dog everyone else had written off. In quiet moments, Maddie reflected on all she'd learned. She understood now that real courage isn't loud or showy. Sometimes it's just refusing to give up when the world tells you to quit. Sometimes it's choosing love over fear, even when it hurts. And sometimes it's realizing that healing isn't about forgetting what you've lost, but about opening your heart to what's still possible. For Rick, the lesson was just as profound. By fighting for Brutus, he'd learned to fight for hope, for forgiveness, for a future where pain didn't have to define them. He wrote a final entry in his journal: "We are all more than our worst day. Sometimes all it takes is one person or one dog willing to believe in us, to remind us that second chances are worth fighting for." The town of Cedar Falls, once divided by fear and suspicion, found itself changed. Neighbors looked at each other differently, old grudges fading in the light of new understanding. People began to question their assumptions about animals, about children with struggles, about families healing in their own ways. And through it all, Brutus remained at the center, a living reminder of the power of patience, courage, and love. Spring rolled in fully to Cedar Falls, painting the trees in pale green and dusting the air with the scent of new grass. By now, everyone in town knew Brutus, not just as the dangerous dog from the old stories, but as the four-legged hero who'd changed a family and a whole community forever. On a bright Saturday morning, the Parker family stood at the center of the annual Cedar Falls Spring Fair. The field was alive with laughter and music, tents selling homemade pies and crafts, banners flapping in the soft breeze. Maddie clung to Brutus's leash, beaming with a pride she'd never felt before, while Rick and Donna set up a booth marked Second Chance Adoption Program. Meet Cedar Falls real-life heroes. Kids gathered around to pet Brutus, asking questions, offering treats, some shyly asking Maddie if they could walk him for a minute. Brutus responded to each with patience and warmth, his tail waving like a friendly flag. Even the parents who'd once crossed the street now lingered, wanting to hear the story for themselves, wanting to believe that change was possible. Donna stood beside Rick, passing out flyers and answering questions about the new shelter program. Brutus showed us what second chances look like, she told a local reporter. He's proof that sometimes all it takes is someone willing to believe and a little time to turn things around. The mayor stopped by to shake Maddie's hand and snap a photo with Brutus for the town website. He's part of our community now, the mayor said, voice proud. We're lucky to have all three of you here. All day, Maddie watched as other families met dogs from the shelter. Some nervous, some excited, all hopeful. She saw herself in those first hesitant touches, the moments where fear and hope mingled together. More than once, she knelt down to reassure a child or a dog, sharing quiet words of encouragement, the same way she'd once whispered to Brutus through the shelter fence. By afternoon, the Second Chance booth was the most popular spot at the fair. A big board hung behind the Parkers, filled with photos of dogs who'd found homes, their before and after stories written out in Maddie's careful handwriting. Rick watched with quiet pride as Maddie spoke to visitors, her voice strong and steady. Sometimes he caught himself smiling, unforced, unguarded, the kind of smile he thought he'd lost forever. As the sun began to set, casting the fair in golden light, the Parkers walked the grounds together, Brutus trotting beside them, tail high, a living symbol of hope and resilience. They stopped for lemonade and fried dough, for a moment simply a family among many, no longer the center of controversy, but a source of inspiration. Back at home, as dusk settled over Cedar Falls, Maddie curled up with Brutus in the backyard. Fireflies blinked in the grass, and the stars began to poke through the soft indigo sky. Rick joined them, sitting quietly, soaking in the peace that now seemed to flow through their lives. "Remember when we first brought you home?" Maddie murmured, stroking Brutus's fur. "I was scared. Dad was scared. You were scared too, but we made it, didn't we?" Rick wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We did, because you wouldn't let us give up." There was a comfort in their silence, a deep understanding that healing had come, not all at once, but in fits and starts, slow, hard-won, but real. The old grief hadn't vanished. It lived with them, a quiet companion. But now it was softened by laughter, by hope, by the promise of new beginnings. As the night deepened, Rick took out his journal for the last time. He wrote, "In a world that's quick to judge, slow to forgive, we found our way back through faith, patience, and the courage to hope. Brutus taught us that broken things aren't always lost. Sometimes, they're the ones who teach us how to put ourselves back together." The story of Brutus and the Parker family spread far beyond Cedar Falls. Donna's Second Chance program became a model for shelters across the state, inspiring people to look past reputation and see the heart beneath. Maddie was invited to speak at the school assembly about bravery and compassion. Rick was asked to write an article for the local paper, sharing their journey so others might find hope in their own struggles. The community, once so quick to judge, learned to look at each other and at themselves with softer eyes. Neighbors helped neighbors. Families took chances on difficult dogs, and children who once felt like outcasts began to find friends in unexpected places. Brutus remained at the center of it all, a little grayer around the muzzle, a little slower on his walks, but always ready to greet anyone with a wag and a gentle nudge. Maddie knew there would still be hard days, but she faced them differently now. She'd learned that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about loving fiercely, even when the world said it was too risky. As the next spring rolled in, Maddie, Rick, and Brutus walked into the heart of the fair, side by side. They weren't outcasts anymore. They were a symbol of healing, of unity, of what's possible when someone refuses to give up. Children ran ahead to greet Brutus. Parents called out thank yous and stories of their own. For everyone who heard their story, it was more than a tale about a dog. It was a call to action, a gentle push to look for the broken things in their own lives and give them a second chance. To pause before judging, to reach out before turning away, to believe, no matter the odds, that hope can bloom in the most unexpected places. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, wondering if a risk is worth it, if a broken heart can heal, or if a second chance is possible, remember Brutus, remember Maddie and Rick, and remember that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is keep believing, because you never know when a last chance will turn into a brand new beginning.